strategic planning process and performance funding for Kentucky's higher education system. Before we get started, I'll take a moment to introduce the members of the Council on Higher Education who are here today. We're fortunate to have our chairman, Jim Miller, who sits here. Jim is from Owensboro, attorney in Owensboro, Kentucky, and he's been the chairman of the council during the past year or so. Also, at the end of the table, we have Denny Wedge, who is here. Denny's a resident of Bowling Green, is a member of the council, and also a former member of the Board of Regents at Western. We are fortunate to have our executive director here, Gary Cox, and members of his staff. To my left is Ken Walker and Mike Cardone and Joanne Lang. Before we would proceed, I would first like to express our appreciation to Western Kentucky University and to President Meredith, to the administration, the faculty and staff and students for the hospitality in hosting this forum. We look forward to hearing your comments. I would also like to thank those of you that are here as observers or as participants from outside the university community. Certainly your interest is one of the key elements in the planning and funding review process. Just a few logistical matters and we'll be ready to begin. There's a sign-in sheet for anyone who wishes to make comments this evening. If you would like to make an oral presentation, please sign in if you haven't already done so. Also, if you would like to submit written comments and you have them with you, you may give them to any member of the council staff or anyone at the front table, and we will see that they are made a part of the public record. You may do this whether or not you make oral comments this evening. Finally, if you would like to submit written comments but don't have them with you this evening, you may send them to the Council on Higher Education by no later than October 31st, 1994. The address is on the back of the handout that you received when you entered the room. At this time, I'd like to give you a little background about this forum. First, this process is not new to Kentucky higher education. We have held two series of statewide public forums, one in the mid and one in the late 80s, to seek input on the system-wide strategic plan. In addition, hearings on higher education's funding formula were conducted first in 1982 and then again in 1988. As Kentucky statutes state, we are required periodically to review the formula and seek input through a hearing process such as this. This forum is a bit different from what we've done in the past. While it is still a statutory requirement that we hear from all segments of the educational community regarding the formula, we are very interested in seeking advice at an even broader policy level. That is, one, the strategic plan for the 1996-2000 year 2000, which guides the direction of the higher, which guides direction of higher education, and two, the relatively new concept of performance funding for Kentucky's higher education institutions. Regardless of whether such a form is required by statute, you should know that the council and the council staff value institutional and public input. Therefore, we would hold these forums even in the absence of the statutory requirement. This series of forums represents initial steps in two separate but integrated processes that are in place. One for the updating the system-wide strategic plan for the years 1996 through 2000, and the second for developing a statewide performance funding model for the 1996-1998 biennium. Members of the council, council staff, institutions, the legislature, and the governor's office are all participants in these two processes. We need to complete the funding model review by no later than March of 1995. Your input this evening will guide our discussions and decisions over the next several months. I have only one ground rule as we begin hearing from you. We are not here today to second-guess this institution's administration and some action it might have taken in the past. Neither are we here to second-guess your Board of Regents on how they may have allocated funds or set policies and priorities. I'm sure you all know that the governance of this institution is left to the Board of Regents. That is the way the statute describes it, and that is the way that it should be. We are not here to talk about local personality issues. We are here to hear from you regarding system-wide strategic planning and performance funding issues. The handout you have outlines some of the issues we need to address over the next several months, and we are eager to hear what you have to say about them before we proceed any further in our deliberations. For example, from a strategic planning perspective, we are interested in upgrading the quality of our instruction, research, and service programs, and are addressing such questions as, should learning outcomes be identified and measured for all degree programs. We are interested in institutional effectiveness and efficiency. Such questions as, should productivity thresholds be maintained for all degree programs? We're interested in access and educational attainment as we ask, should the state's historical emphasis on relatively open access to all institutions be continued, or should more selective admissions policies be employed to better assure student collegiate success? And we're interested in equal opportunities, in economic development, in school reform, in advocacy, and in financial support. Questions like, should program development respond to high-demand careers? And how can the accomplishments of Kentucky's colleges and universities be promoted need to be addressed. With regard to state financial support in particular, we are interested in developing a funding model which is driven by a set of performance measures reflecting what it is that we in Kentucky value in our system of public higher education institutions. Here we're interested in questions like what types of performances can be incorporated into the model and what specific measures should be used, and how much of the anticipated increase in state appropriations should be committed to performance funding. And finally, how can the higher education community clearly communicate its needs and its performance to statewide decision makers? Seeking the answers to these and other questions about the future of higher education in this state is why we are here this evening. Dr. Cox, would you do the honor of introducing the legislators who are with us this evening?
I believe Senator Nick Kefoglis is the legislator I've seen so far, and of course Pat Kefoglis, who's chairman of the Council Alumni Association here in Bowling Green, is with him. Pat used to be a member of the council.
We're delighted to have you all with us and are fortunate to have two people like you in this community who have a great deal of interest in higher education. Ordinarily, we would have our first presentation from President Meredith. We understand that Senator Kefoglis can only be with us for a little while and then he has to leave, so we're going to ask Senator Kefoglis if there's anything you want to say or address to this council.
I want to thank you for coming. I regret that I'm not going to be able to stay for the entire meeting. I'm sure there'll be a lot to learn, and I'm sure there will be many contributors to the subject at hand. As all of you know, the members of the General Assembly have been very interested in performance funding approach. It's a complex issue. It's difficult to know just exactly what should be measured and how it ought to be measured. But we do think it's very important that that there be a degree of accountability in the system as far as funding goes, and performance funding does, or it is hoped that performance funding will provide that degree of accountability and provide incentives to universities to perform at the highest possible level. So I hope we'll have some good testimony, and I say I regret that I won't be able to stay. I thank you all very much for being here and welcome you to Bowling Green. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we appreciate your support for higher education, Senator Kefoglis. We'll first hear then from President Meredith. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I'd like to welcome all the members of the council to Bowling Green, to Western Kentucky University. We're always pleased to have you on our campus, and hope you'll come back more often. Let me begin, if I can, by introducing some members of our Board of Regents who are in the audience today. Ms. Peggy Loafman, who is the Vice Chair of the Board, is on the end here. Ms. Kristen Bale, Regent from Glasgow. Dr. Ray Mendel, who is the Faculty Regent. Mr. Rob Evans, where's Rob? Oh, we're on the end. Mr. Rob Evans, who is our Student Regent. Have I overlooked one? Oh, and so you come in. Ms. Joy Grambling, who is our Staff Regent. Thank you. Boy, you don't want to miss those who have votes. I apologize for that. But at any rate, let me begin by expressing regrets from the chair of our Board of Regents, Mr. Earl Fisher of Owensboro, for not being here. A member of his family had surgery today, and which prevents his appearance. He and Vice Chair Loafman asked me to relay to you their concurrence with the thoughts and ideas expressed in a letter from Regent Burns Mercer, which I'll share with you in just a moment, that he's sending to Mr. Miller, and their concurrence also with my comments that will follow the reading of that letter. If you'll permit me, let me read the short letter from Mr. Mercer to Mr. Miller. I'm disappointed that I cannot be present for the hearing that you're conducting at Western Kentucky University. My responsibilities require that I be out of state at this time. I was a part of the state's first strategic plan developed by the Council on Higher Education. As a former chair of the Council and the Board of Regents at Western Kentucky University, I've had the opportunity to observe the importance of an effective strategic plan. Although no one would question the final authority of the Council on Higher Education in establishing the strategic plan, let me suggest that you request as much input as possible on the front end of the process. All of us in higher education are trying to engage individuals who are affected by our decisions as a part of our planning process. It certainly is more time-consuming, but we believe it is worth it in terms of the final product. Regarding performance funding, please know of Western Kentucky University's commitment to some degree of funding based upon performance. Let me reiterate that we are also supportive of a base level of funding that will enable this university to effectively engage in long-term planning. Certainly, an inflation factor should be incorporated in the base funding as well as capital costs and state-mandated programs. There is much to be accomplished, but I'm sure that with your leadership and the cooperation of the universities, all of these challenges can be effectively addressed. And that's a letter from Burns Mercer, and I know you all know of his commitment to good strategic planning. Let me now share a few thoughts on the two topics at hand. First, I believe strongly in strategic planning. This administration initiated this institution's first ever strategic plan in 1989, and it has served us well. That process followed Dr. Robert Shirley's model, and you all had a chance to hear from Dr. Shirley a little over a week ago at the Council on Higher Education conference in Lexington. That model calls for heavy involvement by those closest to the point of action. Those people closest to the point of action can best identify the strengths, weaknesses, needs, planning assumptions, and goals for their locale as well as their disciplines. The same principle holds true for statewide planning. The pieces must first be developed by the universities and those they serve. The Council on Higher Education then, in conjunction with the institution, should then develop statewide goals based on the knowledge base that has been provided. The institution should be charged with developing plans to address these goals. The operational plan cannot and should not be developed at the state level. I fully agree with Mr. Mercer and Mr. Fisher that the authority of the Council in developing a statewide strategic plan is not questioned. However, the process used will certainly determine its success. The process we are suggesting is certainly slower and more time-consuming, but we believe it will foster the partnership atmosphere which is necessary for success in the 90s. Regarding performance funding, allow me to make a few suggestions. I think first of all, and this is a big one, I think you should ask the legislative leadership for a reprieve from the spring of 1995 deadline for completing the performance funding goals. Promise them that this task will be completed prior to the opening of the 1996 General Assembly. The rationale for this request is simple. The state strategic plan must be completed and adopted before the priorities for funding can be established. If we don't know where we're going or what our goals are, how can the state determine what to fund or what to prioritize in funding? There's a logical sequence, and we think it should be followed. Unless we leave the wrong impression, we certainly are excited about having the initial set of performance funding standards for an extra funding cycle, but we would accept them for a properly sequenced process. Let me continue. Western Kentucky University supports performance funding for a portion of our state appropriation. We remain steadfast in that position. We believe that a significant base level of funding should be provided for each public institution of higher learning. It should be an operational base in which we can engage in effective strategic planning. An annual inflation factor should be added, and any capital costs and state-mandated program costs should be supplements to that base funding. I wrote to you earlier on this topic and suggested that reasonable fluctuations in enrollment should not impact that base. Slight up or slight down, the base should remain constant. But then performance funding should be on top of that base. We believe performance funding should address quality and not other issues. Easily measurable items should not serve as the rationale for which items to use in determining quality and performance funding. Success stories in performance funding are few across the United States. I would suggest that we walk slowly and with great flexibility in order to find our way on this new road. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks.
Mr. Stebbins.
Charles Stebbins. Okay. At this time, we'd like to recognize President Charles Stebbins, President of the Elizabethtown Community College, for any remarks that he would like to make.
Appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. Louisville is a little bit closer to Elizabethtown, and some of our folks had attended that session. I just have a few words. Really, I'll present my longer version of comments in writing, but there are some things that I do think I need to say. First of all, I believe very strongly in the concept of performance funding. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we need to be accountable for what we do. I do have some of the same concerns that Dr. Meredith reflected. I'm not sure that the performance funding should represent 100% performance. I think we need to pay attention to some housekeeping that must be funded on a regular basis. But in order to have some measure of the quality of what we're doing, I think performance has to play a role in the funding process. One of the components is productivity in degree programs, and I believe also that productivity in degree programs is important. But I think we have to be, particularly in relation to the community colleges, clearly understanding the mission of the community college and the desires of the students. We have many students enrolled in degree programs who have no desire to earn a degree, yet they achieve their goals very clearly by taking 4, 5, 6, or 8 courses in that degree area. They're currently employed, they've improved their position in their employment, and they can proceed. And so we have to be very careful that we understand the mission when we're looking at productivity, and look at productivity in other areas of the mission than degrees. One of the most successful areas that Elizabethtown has is our business and industry development program. We've been extremely successful there, and I think our community reflects that success. We've had a number of new industries in that small community, and they're a direct result of that kind of programming, and so productivity there is also very important. As far as the funding model is concerned, there too I think it must reflect a clear understanding of the mission of all the institutions of higher education. And attention ought to be paid to equity of funding among the institutions of higher education in the state. Equity on a relative basis. Community colleges compared to community colleges, certain size master's level institutions compared to certain size master's level institutions, and then look at those relative funding positions in a comparative way. And we have a serious problem, I think, in this state with comparative funding as far as higher education is concerned. That needs attention without question. One more comment. Well, I think I'll leave it at that. I'm very pleased that we're on this road. It makes a lot of sense. When I came to the state 8 years ago now, I thought that teamwork would be the word, because basketball is the word in the state of Kentucky, and we should know what teamwork is. But when I got into the higher education arena, I didn't see a whole lot of teamwork. I saw a lot of competition. And where we're heading is teamwork. Statewide strategic planning is essential. Quality strategic planning is essential. Clear understanding of mission is essential. And I applaud the council for moving in the direction that they're moving. I want to be sure that the community colleges have a seat at the table, and are clearly heard in terms of their needs and the very important role that we fill in the arena of higher education in Kentucky. Thanks.
Thank you, President Stebbins. Next on the list is Larry Snyder.
Good evening.
You might tell us your position.
Will do. As you already mentioned, I'm Larry Snyder, and I'm Assistant Professor of Religious Studies here at Western, and also Vice Chair of the Faculty Senate for this session, and it's in the latter capacity that I address you. First of all, let me thank you for providing this opportunity for the public, and in particular, in my case, the faculty, to have input into discussions on the state and direction of higher education in Kentucky. My comments on the issues of strategic planning and performance funding are brief and general. Rather than proposing policy initiatives, I wish to ask the Council to consider some preliminary matters. First of all, my greatest concern is not for the particulars of policy implementation, but rather for the assumptions behind such decision-making. It seems that the Council, university administrators, and faculty all ought to be more deliberate in clarifying the assumptions about the purpose of higher education before such policies are established. We can identify at least 3 operant assumptions about the function of a university. 1, a university in the historic sense is a community of faculty and students committed to promoting the free exchange of ideas and the pursuit of knowledge, something that's especially appealing to us in the liberal arts. Second, a university functions to provide students with specialized skills and organizational tools useful in the marketplace. Third, the university is primarily an institution of socialization, intended to bring minorities and marginalized citizens into the mainstream of society. The question facing Western and all Kentucky universities is how best to balance this mix. How are we to fulfill our mission? No doubt we will need to do all of these things. Maybe we need to do something else as well. But priorities need to be made explicit prior to establishing policy. In this regard, colleagues have expressed great reservations about the, quote, commercialization of higher education, by which I mean this. In an effort to sell the need for continued and even increased funding of higher education in the state to a public often skeptical of the worth of the academic life, legislators and administrators have begun to argue for university funding based upon its cash value to the state. For every dollar invested, the Commonwealth receives $1.35 in return, or something of that sort. This seems to me to be a potentially dangerous tactic, especially if we begin to believe our own PR. There is no question that an educated workforce is a more productive one, that it is in our economic best interest to educate our populace. However, and forgive me my idealism here, education has intrinsic value in and of itself. The pursuit of knowledge and the cultivation of learning for the sake of learning is good for the soul. It should help to make persons more well-rounded, more creative, more tolerant, more whole, and such citizens help to create better communities and thus contribute to the quality of life that we all seek. To promote higher education simply because it is profitable caters to the kind of mentality that prompts young freshmen to ask why they must take Western Civ or Biology 101 if they're studying to become a stockbroker. It's not relevant, they complain. True, those courses may not help them in their chosen profession, but it will certainly help them become more educated and hopefully better persons. We can also hope then that this will help to make them the kind of individual that employers will covet. Finally, I fear that such commercialization only validates the often misguided attacks upon higher education from without. In order to pacify our critics and protect our consumer base, legislators in Frankfurt and sometimes even university administrators have glorified the role of undergraduate instruction at the expense of research. We do this at our own peril because good teaching demands ongoing research. Rather than catering to populist misconceptions about what universities do or don't do in these areas, our leaders ought to be advocating the traditional role of education in training young people to be thoughtful, informed, and socially aware citizens. We ought not to be market-driven, as if we are producing Corvettes off an assembly line. As departments in Potter College have recently affirmed in their review of President Meredith's New Level Initiative, education is not a commodity whose worth is determined by the market. Wendell Berry, Kentucky's preeminent gentleman farmer and pundit, recently argued that educational emphasis upon career placement is both short-sighted and self-defeating. We diminish the role of education if we treat it merely as a career track. The goal of education, says Berry, is not the training of workers or even of citizens, but, and I quote here, to preserve and pass on the essential human means, the thoughts, words, and works and ways and standards and hopes without which we are not human. In making better and more responsible humans, we thus train our students to participate more fully in the community, including the marketplace. We give them the tools for life. And then finally, two concerns that colleagues have expressed more specifically with regard to performance funding. One, how precisely are we, for example, to increase retention and graduate rates without lowering expectations? Some argue that we already graduate too many students who are not ready. Better advisement and more extensive nurture can only do so much if a student is not up to par. Attracting better quality students up front will certainly help in this regard, but we must have something to attract them to us. More and better scholarships or expanded honors program or college would do this. This requires institutional investment and commitment, however, not marketing smoke and mirrors. Secondly, and finally, faculty also worry that performance funding will be overly concerned with a random and uncritical body count. Will sheer numbers of graduates and majors be the only gauges of a program's effectiveness? Relatively small programs with a long and venerable tradition in the academy, to name a few, anthropology, philosophy, and my own religious studies, often do not attract large numbers of majors, but service great numbers of students in general education. Outcomes assessments are completely misguided if they assume that the worth of a program can be determined solely by the number of graduating majors who land jobs, for example. Such programs are essential in fostering critical thinking skills and self-reflection that are the hallmarks of an educated person. Until such concerns as these are addressed and some university-wide consensus is reached, we ought to move slowly on these matters. And I respectfully submit this for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Was it Mark Levy? Is that right? If you would, please identify.
Yes, I am Marv Levy, and I am a coordinator in the university libraries here at Western. I, too, come before the council in my role with the Faculty Senate. I'm currently the chair of Faculty Senate for this academic year. First, let me thank you, council members, for scheduling this visit to Bowling Green and to Western, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come before you. I'm going to be very brief. I do wish to reserve the right to send an expanded version of what I do say by that October 31st deadline. Neither of the first two 5-year strategic plans adopted by the Council expressed statewide goals in terms of improvement in the Commonwealth's rank position relative to other states. This was, in my view, wise. There is still no benefit in couching our aspirations in such comparative terms for one very simple reason. Kentucky has no control whatsoever over the resources that other states may expend toward the very same targets. There are other reasons not to play the state ranking game in an open system such as the United States, but that one reason alone, I think, does suffice. I do hope that if the Council is going to link objectives it adopts in a statewide strategic plan for 1996 to 2000, to link those objectives with the criteria that it gains consensus upon in a performance funding model, that both the objectives in the strategic plan and the criteria in the performance funding model that are developed be concrete and measurable ones. That does not mean they are to be, it is desired that they be simple, measurable, and concrete ones. I believe it is better to strive for quantifiable increases on desired criteria, whatever those criteria might wind up being, be they retention rates, be they graduation rates, or whatever other desired criteria are ultimately developed. I think it's better to strive for quantifiable increases on those in which there is widespread agreement, even if the measurable results lend themselves to a ranking of the state's institutions of public higher education on those criteria. A performance funding model which allocates even some higher education budget dollars to schools based upon these rank order results would be a bold step. We must be sure that if we are about to take such a bold step, that excellence, which is a word that I prefer to the word quality, but probably should be viewed as synonymous, we must be sure that excellence is built into these performance measures and that institutions with the same mission statements can strive to meet higher levels of performance on these criteria and then let the comparative chips fall where they may. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker on the list is Mike Reynolds, who is a local Bowling Green attorney and also a member of the Advocates for Higher Education. Mike?
Joe Bill, thank you. Gary, thank you. Other council members, thank you for coming. That's my main message on behalf of the Kentucky Advocates. Thanks for going around the state and having these public forums on your own time and at your own expense for the ability of the administrators, the faculty, staff, and others to come forward and say what they might about. For the first time, I think the 1994-96 budget includes money for this performance funding, and I don't know how you'll set it up, and I don't know how it'll work, and I'm sure that's a big, important item that most of us are here about. But on a personal basis, I would just like to say that whatever comes of this, I hope that one issue that you can address and continue to keep in front of you is the importance for the need for access to the universities from all the students coming in. And from a personal basis, I hope that you could give a little more leverage to that than quality, because I think that from a lot of us who came from different situations, I think it's always important to at least have a chance to be there first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. James and Carolyn McDaniel.
Thank you for being here. I just want to say that I'm just concerned about the minority retention and employment. I'm very concerned about that, being a former Kentuckian and a former Western Kentucky athlete, and that I hope that the universities that go along with this particular program will be rewarded, and I hope that the ones that are not going along with the program, that we can do better, because I think all of our students, former athletes, we all need an opportunity to be a part of a university, and I think that it's very important that we have more minority opportunities in this state. This is a wonderful state, and I just hope that we can do better as far as the minority situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brent Wilder.
I have no comment at this time.
Rob Evans.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, thank you for the council also for taking your personal time and the initiative to go around the state and address each individual institution. I appreciate that. I'm in a unique situation in that I have the ability to address you as a student body president, and also as a member of the Board of Regents. And I just want to take a second and to address those each individually. As a student, I feel as though my basic rights and my needs as a student are, first of all, an affordable and quality education, and number two, a positive and stress-free environment for learning. Well, as we've moved from a state-funded to a state-assisted university, some of those, part of those two needs have been eliminated due to the necessity for many students to take on personal loans as well as educational loans in order to compensate for that. So partly of I feel as though part of my needs have been eliminated. Also, I'd like to address you as a student government president as to do with strategic planning. My needs, or my desire as a student body president, is to address the needs from the bottom up, not from the top down. I am in a unique position in that I am a student and I am able to address my own personal needs, but also I feel as though in strategic planning, bottom up identification of needs is certainly a necessity. And I feel that Western is a unique institution. I fear that when we try to mold or model ourselves after other universities, other institutions, we're going to lose our identity as an institution. So that is certainly a concern of myself. And also, for performance-based funding, well, we need to know what the base is. Certainly Kentucky State, University of Kentucky, U of L, Western, we're all different, as I said, unique institutions, and we need to take in consideration what makes us unique and also have a fair and reasonable base in which to set that on. As I say, not all students are A students, and not all students will graduate in 4 years. Some of their educations will be interrupted by either families or by, for myself, military service. So those are certainly some factors to consider. And finally, as a region, one of the trustee responsibilities is to maintain autonomy. As I said, Western is a unique institution, and we need to set our own goals and own ideas as an institution and not to be molded across the board as other universities and other institutions are. So I thank you for your time and thank you for consideration. And I would like to submit more to the board later in writing. So thank you.
Certainly.
That's all on the list. So is there anybody else wants to speak?
Yeah. There are no other people on the, who signed up on the list, but we're going to open the floor for anybody that wants to make a comment or pose any questions. Anyone else? Well, I've got some questions, if that's all right. I don't want to pass on the opportunity to get as much information as we can from the universities. President Meredith, as you know, we on the council and those involved with higher education know that over the past decade in this state, we have been extremely successful in attracting more students to higher education. When we had the governor's trustee conference a couple of weeks ago, we had Joanne Lang presented some demographics that I've really found mind-boggling. It showed the percent of high school graduates going on to college in 1980, and then it showed the same statistics in 1990 from each county, and it had been a tremendous explosion, growth in the number of students attending higher education institutions. During that same period of time, the amount of money allocated to higher education by the legislative and executive branches of government went from 20% of the state's budget to 14% of the state budget. And correspondingly, student tuition has increased significantly. Given the current state of finances in this state, not seeing at this point in time whether there's going to be a whole lot of new money for higher education, I'm very much interested in how you and how this university feels about access versus quality. How long do we continue to take students from high school who aren't prepared to do college work? Should there be enrollment caps for the four-year institutions? Are we going to have to do a better program, a better job in this state of what Western has done an excellent job of, and that is developing the 2+2 programs, so that if we're going to put more students in the community college, we've got to make sure that they're taking courses that will get them into the four-year college. If we're only going to have so much money to spend in this state for higher education, and that's been pretty much the situation, what are we going to do to our students? Because tuition is going to increase unless we get more money from state allocations. These are just a lot of the real concerns that we have, and in trying to develop a strategic plan and trying to look at performance funding, I think there are a lot of people on the council that are greatly concerned about this argument of access versus quality. I'd just like to hear your comments on some of that.
I'm glad to address those.
President, I forgot to mention the cross-examination.
I was starting to drift off over there. Come back in a hurry. Your points are well made. On our campus, I don't have the exact figures. Dr. Garman would have those more clearly, but our state funding in the period of time you've talked about has moved from 56% of our budget down to about 45% of our budget. The student percent of tuition percent of our budget's moved from something like 15% to 23, 24%. So obviously the burden has shifted. And I think that's what Rob was talking about there partially along that line. You take a state like Kentucky that ranks 48th in the nation in the percentage of its adult population age 25 or older that have a college degree. It certainly seems to me to yell out with a strong message regarding the question of access. We need a college-educated population if we're going to be competitive in the year 2000, and I sent you all some comments about that recently that I had written for an opinion piece in the paper. I don't need to reiterate all of those. Access is absolutely critical. But by the same token, the fact we've had 13 budget cuts in 10 years, you've seen this shift occur in how we're funded, and you see the burden that our students are sharing, which we really struggle with on a campus. Because on the one hand, Rob and I just talked about this today, as a matter of fact, in my office on another matter, but the idea that if we're going to continue to move forward, given the backing off by the state, we need the tuition in order to give the raises and all those kind of things that we've been doing. By the same token, it's for those of us in the education business, it's a heartbreaker to watch these young people go out of here now with incredible indebtedness. The percentage of people falling into the Pell Grant arena seems to shrink off somewhat now as those standards keep changing. So our students who are in that wide other range suddenly find themselves continuing to borrow and borrow and borrow. All of those things continue to impact all of the data that we're looking at in terms of performance funding, Senate Bill 109, and graduation rates and retention and so forth and so on. Because we see a vast movement in our students. They can't graduate in 4 years. I bet across those of you up there, I won't ask you to embarrass you, but I imagine most of you got out in about 4 years, maybe 4.5 or even less or whatever. That's become a rarity. These kids are working. They've got all kinds of other kinds of responsibilities trying to gain dollars. It's not uncommon at all to see many of our students coming through that have been around here as long as I've been here. I'm in my 7th year, and they're just now getting out. And many more who are just still here because they're taking what they can afford, and they're working and trying to just continue to move forward. It's a difficult position. As long as higher education is down on the priority list, that position is not going to change in terms of the difficulty for our students. None of us want an increase in tuition. I mean, I see the burden some of these kids are carrying. Run across a kid every so often, it's only eating 2 meals a day because they can't eat 3. They're just getting by the best they can. So we struggle with that constantly. But by the same token, if we're going to have access, we've got to have the dollars in order to have the access. We've restructured and reallocated and pushed this institution around. We've privatized things. We've put things on a self-sufficient basis. We've about run out of all the magic mirrors now to deal with this. And we're to the point of lopping off now major ingredients of the institution. That will reduce access. We've been dealing with an item on our campus, a discussion paper, that's been working itself through the campus through last spring on moving to a new level while keeping old traditions, is what it's called. And it's a matter of trying to say we can't continue to do what we've always done for so many people. So we're going to have to raise our standards and give a real college education to those who are capable and ready to move forward with a college education in a reasonable time frame. Yet by the same token, we're trying to deal with access by simply saying we're going to provide some place for those students to come in outside of the mainstream of the institution, where we're going to move at a much more rapid pace. And whether it's our community college or another entity, some institutions call a university college, or a lot of things they're calling it. And for those students, we'll continue to try to get them prepared with some funding on the side over here outside of the main arena of the institution. Because we've got to continue to have access some way in the state of Kentucky, and quite frankly, in particular, in our section of the state. We have a very, very low rate down here, and Joanne's data that she put on the screen the other day demonstrated that vividly for our part of the state. Warren County is like an oasis of people going to college compared to the areas around us. And since then, Joanne, you had an impact on us, because since then we've had numerous meetings trying to determine what on earth we can do to encourage those counties that are so represented in such a low fashion, how we can get them in here, knowing full well that the ones that are in those counties that are not here are not the top students. And it's going to be larger numbers of people who need more help, and yet the money is not there to do that. So what do we do with access and what do we do with quality? It's a toughie. Should we put caps? I don't see how we can. In the state of Kentucky, it's just going to be hard. When you rank 48th, you can't cut off people going to college. Chuck Stebbins and the community colleges have just maxed out on what the numbers that they can take. We all look at the demographic data, and we know in just a very short period of time, this decline that we're in right now goes just like that, takes off again, and here they come again. And yet we're not prepared financially to deal with that at all. And we're in a real bind. We spent a great deal of time talking about this and trying to find new strategies, and our board does as well, and it's a toughie. We do the 2+2 programs. As you know, we initiated a major move along that way, which has been very beneficial and helpful to students transferring from community colleges. It's just more people coming, and we've got to address those needs with a smaller and smaller percentage of the state budget going to higher education. This state has got to raise its sights. I won't reiterate what I said in the article the other day, but this state basing its economy on a high school education is just not going to be competitive when the next century hits the mark. In this global economy, that's not what is going to drive the economy. And I'm afraid Kentucky is going to be out of it, and as long as we keep funding higher education the way we are, Kentucky's not going to be in the game in the long run. Can't worry about next year and the year after. I have to, but I can't spend a lot of time worrying about it. I've got to worry about the year 2000. And I don't think Kentucky's going to be in the game if we don't make some changes regarding higher education, because higher education is the answer to all of this. It is the answer. I believe that. Well, that's a long answer, but
Thank you. It's very helpful.
any other questions?
Any other?
You're preaching to the
Questions?
choir for the most part, you know.
Yeah, I know that. Thank you.
Yes. President Stebbins?
I'd like just to make a couple more comments in relation to what Thomas just said. Community colleges will be the access point for many, many people in our state. There's no question about it. And as the access point, we're going to have to deal with underprepared students. Now, that doesn't mean that CARA is not going to work. As a matter of fact, we've already seen some positive results of CARA. We've seen some improvement in writing ability and mathematics already, and I expect to see significantly greater improvement as time goes on. We have to recognize that 70% of the workforce in 2000 is already employed, and so access is not going to just be for new students, but it's going to be for students that have already been through the system and have not developed the basic skills. So we will, for quite a long time, be paying attention to basic skills or developmental studies. It seems like, and there is a lot of logic in assuming that job should already be done. And I'm convinced as CARA continues, we will see that job being done in a much stronger fashion. So let's not forget all those folks out there who didn't enjoy the benefits of CARA, and they'll be with us for a long time. Not only will they be retrained for the year 2000, but we may have to retrain that same group for the year 2006 or 2016. It's a spiral, and because of the demands of the workforce change so dramatically, we'll always be training and upgrading the current workforce. So I think that's a very important thing. There may be some possibilities with telecommunications in terms of the improvement of the delivery system, and I think we ought to pay a lot of attention to that. I think one of the strengths that we have, very much concerned about the fact that we've gone from 20% to 16% of the state budget. It may be because we've not been playing as a team with a good, strong strategic plan that we're all committed to, one that is as a result of a good, strong team effort. With higher education playing on the same sheet of music, we may be able to impact the legislature in regard to the percentage of the budget that is devoted to higher education, and particularly when they realize that the investment that they're making impacts the economy, which in turn invests the number of dollars that they have to work with. If we used Elizabethtown as a model in terms of return on investment, in the last now 7 years, there have been now 6 new industries in that town of 18,000, and they've created almost 2,700 new jobs in a town of 18,000. Now that's a great investment on the dollar. And if we in higher education can't educate the rest of the state to this logic, then maybe we ought to get somebody else doing what we're doing, because we've got a great system and a great opportunity to impact the global competitiveness of this state. And if we don't get on the same sheet of music and begin to impact the legislature, we'll have less and less to work with in terms of the pie. We can impact the size of the pie and therefore impact the amount of money that we have to work with. It's a game of economics. It's not just education, and we have to be aware of economic theory and how this all works. And so we're not just developing a strategic plan for higher education. We're developing a strategic plan for the economic development of the state.
While you're up, let me ask you a question, and also President Meredith would maybe ask you to respond to this. Do you have any thoughts about what percentage of an institution's budget should be performance-based as opposed to equity-based? I saw President Swain's comment in the paper. I didn't attend the forum in Louisville, but he said a third, I think, of the new money was too much.
Well, it may depend on the amount of money that's available each year. You know, if you think about it in terms of inflation, you almost have to deal with inflation first, and then beyond inflation, because your costs go up, and if your budget doesn't go up, your service has to go down. So think of it in terms of given years, not just a magic formula that says 20% or 30% or 50%, but you look at the inflation figure, look at the number of dollars that there are available to distribute, and then base the performance part on that part that would not relate to inflation. So that percentage may change. It should be, I guess it's tough to come up with any other kind of logic as far as I'm concerned.
One thing we talked about at the executive committee meeting, was it that the funding policy group was what I think of as a wedge concept, that there might be some, for the first dollar, there might be some very small amount committed to performance, which says that we're willing to be accountable from the very beginning. A very small part, might be 1% or 1 cent of the first dollar. But as we get more money, which builds a little bit on what you're talking about, as we get more money, then we have more opportunity to commit more to performance. And one thing about that concept, performance is some part of everything we do related to new money. That's just an idea that I think still has to be discussed, but sends this message of accountability that I think...
You might want to focus on a minimum rather than a maximum. I mean, in a year when inflation's 10% and we've only got 6% to work with, you'll have X percent that would automatically be, at that point, based on productivity or performance, so that doesn't disappear. Excuse me.
President Meredith?
Well, I believe strongly you've got to have an operational base to begin with. You got 200 acres here, 800 acres out on a farm. You've got, I don't know the value of all of our buildings, Jim, but you've got an operational base that you've got to take care of. We've cut it and slashed it and done everything we know to get it down to some sort of efficient bottom. We're operating with far less efficiency in many areas now than we should, simply because we've cut out all of the support things that go with it. I think if you're going to run an organization, you've got to have some base to operate from. And from that base, then, there's got to be certain things that you should try to do to that base each year, if you can possibly. One of those would be an inflation factor, if that can be done. Secondly, there ought to be some capital costs that are involved that are new. They ought to be a part of your base. It's a new figure. It's something new that's occurred. So that ought to be, whether it's debt service or whatever it happens to be, Ken. The third thing should be in terms of, drawing a blank. What's the third thing? Mandated programs. Thank you. If the legislature starts say all fired up, that'll be too bad of a pun. To put in fire safety coordinator positions and all those kind of things on every campus, and it's going to be about a $40,000 cost. Well, that's fine. They can mandate that, but don't make us take away from something that's already operating. That ought to be added as part of the base. Now, how much do you want to reward performance? We just got the place operating now as a base. How much should that be? We get about $50 million now from the state. Some of my colleagues have said, quit saying that, but if you just tell me I got $50 million, that's better than I've known in the past several years. And I'll make that work somehow. Now, it won't be enough. We'll have to sacrifice to get by, but at least I'll know I've got something, and we can effectively plan at this institution. But if I have to wait around for the terrible Octobers that always come along where it's going to be a 5% cut, 3% cut, or whatever, I can't plan effectively. This institution can. So there ought to be a base, and then performance on top of that base. How much? I'd say 3 to 5%. If you can do more, great. If you can't do more, we'll live with 3 to 5%. And it's a reward for doing right, for performing with a quality way. And it shouldn't be just those things that are easily measurable. That doesn't automatically spell quality. It's easy to do, but it doesn't spell quality. In every instance, somebody does.
Thank you. Let me address maybe a question to the members from the faculty senate who spoke. In our 1991 to 96 strategic plan, one of the several factors that we upon which we placed a point of emphasis was teaching, raising teaching to the to a point where it should be rewarded. Teaching should be rewarded. Good teachers should be rewarded. Higher education has gotten some publicity in the last few days about a good teacher being denied tenure because his research was only adequate. I'd just sort of like to hear from the faculty how you feel about this teaching versus research issue.
Well, that's certainly the hot button issue these days, for sure. And I certainly can't speak for all of my colleagues. But I know in going through the recent initiative of the President, that issue's come up again and again. And the institution really needs to make a decision which way it wants to go. We've tried to come up with a balance. I think there's no question that an institution like Western is going to be geared toward instruction. It's a regional university. It's never going to be a major research university, and probably shouldn't be. And I think those of us who work here recognize that, and so we live with that reality. But as long as there are going to be demands made on us with regard to tenure and so forth for research, there's going to have to be some provision made for allowing us to do that. The impression, unfortunately, in the public is that we do nothing but pursue our own agendas, and we're having graduate students teach classes and so forth. At least around here, that's simply not the case. We work very hard in our instruction, and everyone I've talked to here takes their instruction very, very seriously. But as I said, research is important to good instruction as well. And what exactly is the balance? I think if you polled 100 of us, you'd probably get close to 100 different answers.
Depends on whether you're doing research or
that's right. It may be true. But certainly both elements are important. And I was just concerned in my comments we need to make the case to the public that research is not frivolous, that research is important to good education and good education in Kentucky. And we need to find some balance, whether research can be funded as well at a place like Western as it is at UK, probably not. But some provision needs to be made, and what I was asking is that those sorts of decisions be made explicit, so that we know what we're working with and how we can best do what we're called to do. So,
Larry, in your
Yes.
area, are your class sizes getting a lot larger now that faculty staff is smaller in numbers?
I'd say as a whole, yes. Class sizes are increasing, not exponentially. I mean, I did my graduate work at a large university where we had 200 in a class. It's certainly nothing like that. But our intro-level courses are increasing in size. And that makes it very difficult when you wish to assign papers and have writing across the curriculum and so forth, and you don't have graduate assistants, and you've got 3 of these intros with 50 students. It's difficult to assign 3 and 4 papers and 3 and 4 exams. I mean, just the time it takes to prepare, to grade, to teach, and then to do research on top of that is very difficult. So class downsizing, if you want to say, our classes, it helps instruction. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think by reducing the number of faculty we've got available, it increases the class size and makes our job more difficult.
One of the problems students have getting out in 4 years or 5 years is the opportunity to have a class when it's supposed to make. How's that affecting your area?
It's probably more difficult in departments that have fewer majors. You have, particularly at your upper level courses, you have fewer students who will be taking the upper level courses to complete a major. I can't say, particularly in our area, that we've had any required courses that have not made. It's been more difficult at the graduate level, where we've had even less support. The intro level courses, we're not having problems. Upper level courses, some departments are. Does that answer? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Let me ask the student representative, Mr. Evans. What's the number one issue on this campus with the students here as far as their education? Is it the cost? Is it access? Is it the quality of the education and the instruction they're receiving? The access to classes?
Well, I certainly think that all of those are important. All those factors and the combination of those factors are important in deciding on attending an institution. And certainly for myself, I paid for my education myself, and certainly affordability was one of the major factors. Because I'm from Owensboro, it was local, and I had the ability to attend Western at nominal cost. Right now, if I were a graduating senior from Davis County High School, where I graduated from, it would be next to impossible for me to come to Western and finance my education as much as I have on my own. I'm at the top end right now. I'm getting ready to get out next May. I'm starting to work on a master's, and I doubt as to whether I'm going to be able to finish that without having to enter the workforce. I mean, there's a lot of students in that position where the affordability is primarily one of the factors, but we cannot sacrifice the quality of the education here. I think that Western certainly does have, I think Dr. Snyder hit on that, we do not have exponentially large classes, and that was another factor that attracted me. UK, U of L, graduate assistants teaching for the first 2 years. And I think Western, that is one of the factors that makes Western such a unique institution, is its personability and the affordability and the quality of education. So I think it's definitely a combination of all those factors which make Western unique.
Thank you.
I think.
Anything else? Any other questions?
One thing you may be interested in, I'll just kind of make an announcement. 1st of December, we will be presenting the second annual accountability report. Joanne Lang is down at the other end of the table. I would encourage you, as you're interested in these issues, and it's been a very thoughtful discussion, to look at some of those. The remediation information, for example, across the board is very interesting, particularly the relationship between the adult students and their remediation needs and their success in remediation compared to students who come directly from high school who have remediation needs. All that information, I think, is valuable as you think about what we're doing and our planning and our funding. So that will be presented on December 1 to the Interim Joint Committee on Education, and will be available for this university. All of our universities and community colleges are reported on in a very small document, and then we have a system-wide report that you might find interesting. And you now have 2 years of information in most regards, so you can see how you're doing in some of these categories compared to how you did last year, and that's really the value of the report. I don't think certainly anyone at the council and the staff is interested in comparison between institutions, because we all understand our missions are different, our student mix is different. But you do begin to maybe begin to see what you're doing from one year to the next in certain areas that are important to you. So I think that is valuable information in this process.
Okay. President Meredith, we appreciate your hosting this forum, and we appreciate the input of all those. We had a chance to speak. Those of us on the council, and especially those of us on the council from Bowling Green, are most appreciative of what this institution does for this area of the state and for the entire state, and we commend you for that. I was asked a question by a reporter last week how Western would fare in performance-based funding, and I said it would fare very well, I think, and I think you do an excellent job at this institution. Nothing further, we stand adjourned. Thank you.